Yes, so we're in 1988, 10 years after the establishment, or 9 years, depends where you count it from, the establishment of the Islamic regime. And we've just finished the war with Iraq that took so many lives and never really came to any resolution. The government is reeling from that, trying to still establish itself as an Islamic theocracy in the country. And now the focus is internal. Christians begin leaving the country. There is increased persecution, nothing like what we talk about now in Iran. At that point, people still worshipped openly, that there was scrutiny from the government, and technically they weren't allowed to do a lot of the things that we were sort of getting away with in those days.
Right.
And in that climate, of course, then the Christians start thinking, well, we need to get out. There's no future for us here. But also the Muslims start turning to the Lord. And my
Oh,
parents were in leadership in the church there. They were founding members of the church there. And they started hearing the Lord speak to them about leaving as well. And were really concerned about that. They felt that maybe they'd heard wrong. They really wanted to make sure, if it was God, that they would do something like that, because they wanted to be with the church. They wanted to continue to serve the church and also look after the many Muslims that were asking the questions and wanting to join. So they went and prayed for a while, and they took a month praying and fasting separately from each other, just to make sure they'd heard
wow.
right, came back, compared notes, everything aligned. They took it to the overseeing pastor, who also was my dad's best friend. And they said, this is what God is saying to us. And he said, you've heard wrong. We need you here. And they were delighted by that and said,
Yeah.
that's great. We want to stay here. We'll stay here. But then that night he had a dream, the pastor, and God spoke to him and said, no, I have something I need them to do. They need to leave very quickly. And I was 9 when all of this was happening. So he came and woke us up early hours of the morning and said, you did hear right. God's confirmed it to me. And actually there's a sense of urgency to it, and you need to leave. So we
Wow.
left very quickly, and suddenly you can't take anything with you out of the country. They search you. They strip searched my mother on the way out.
Hmm.
So really, it's just you're going on vacation. That's the guys. And even then, I remember every time I went in and out of the country, your suitcases are lined up in the airport. They get everything out, throw it around, check every nook and cranny. So you really are just going, with a few clothing items. So we came out like that, just waiting to hear on the Lord. And then God spoke to them and told them why he'd brought them out, that the church was actually going to be driven underground. Persecution was going to really intensify, and there was work for them to do from outside the country.
What an incredible story. I mean, I'm sure you've told that many times, and I imagine that the reaction is similar. People imagining just
Yeah.
sort of like the intrigue and the excitement, but also the danger and the fear and the risk that's associated with it. Like, no, we're leaving now. Don't take anything with you because we're not coming back, and we need the government not to know.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, it's, I wouldn't want to elevate my family to the
Of
status
course.
of Abraham, but the
Right.
story that we read about him in the Bible, it reminds me of that process. And I think God calls us all on similar journeys where he has something for us, but he doesn't give us the full picture, because he wants us to obey without all the questions. And,
Yes.
we read about that when he says you've got to come out of that place. And only after Abraham listens and obeys and comes out, and he's in that sort of middle ground, when the Lord then speaks to him and actually tells him what's coming next and why he's called him out. But God wants to know first that Abraham will obey him regardless.
Mm.
And that was definitely our experience. Myself, as an adult with my husband and children, we've had multiple experiences similar to that on a smaller scale, where that same principle is played out again. Are we prepared just to obey because we know we've heard him? We don't know what he's doing, why he's doing it, but he's told us to do this, so we'll just do it.
And you may not know this, but my audience does. I've visited more than 30 countries around the world, and including China. I've been to the Middle East, and I think the only region of the world that I haven't been to is sub-Saharan Africa. So I'm familiar with some of the cultural practices and how it's a very different feeling to be in a foreign country, the way that security is handled, the way that the military and police are handled compared to America. So the feeling of urgency and the feeling of risk is genuine. Of course, not Abraham, not Lot, but still something very real for your family.
Yes, very much so.
So, as your family exited, what motivated the setting up of Transform Iran? Is that when the ministry began, or was it shortly after that?
Well, as soon as we came out, within months, really, it was clear that there was something that was cooking in terms of what God wanted to establish from outside the country and what we then knew to anticipate for what would happen to our friends and our family inside the country. And the first step is always to pray. And, the Lord commands blessing where there's unity. We are created for relationship and partnership and cooperation in this kingdom work. And so the first thought that my parents had was, who else do we know that has left the country, Christians from Iran who have probably had similar journeys. A lot of people had left, perhaps led by fear, but also wanting to protect their children, not seeing a future for their family in Iran, but their heart's still back in the country. And there was a lot of heartache there, with people who were sad to see what was happening to their country and to see that perhaps they themselves had no part in it anymore in the
Mm.
future of Iran. And my parents started gathering these people. And, my memories of my preteens and teens are traveling across Europe with my family, event after event. The Christians in Germany, in Holland, in Norway, in Sweden. I mean, literally one after the other, we would go from place to place and they would gather everyone that they knew and we would just pray together and share our hearts with each other, share our vision for the country, incite faith in each other for what God could and would do for Iran. And that just gathered momentum, and it was a very natural organic growth as unity established a whole sort of a core of Christians in Europe at the beginning that wanted to work together to see change. And we got to a point where it needed a name and it needed structure. So it really was born out of a need rather than we're going to set up a ministry and then we'll work from there.
Also, you kind of saw that there was a demand and a desire to help from well outside the nation, that was like, okay, we need to respond to this in a formal way.
Yes, exactly.
So just a quick step. I wonder, the backstory to all of this, of course, is the Shah and the fall of that and the setting up of the theocratic government. That's far too much for us to get into today, and there are many movies about it. But I know that's the backstory to a lot of what's going on. I wonder, for people who want to fill themselves in, if you can recommend some good resources for them to bring them up to the point of the story where your family enters it, because a Christian family inside Iran wasn't necessarily unusual, I think, at a certain point in time, until it became very unusual. But that backstory is so much for us to get into right now.
It is. And actually, we've done a pretty good job, if I say so myself, on our website to
Okay.
summarize some of those things. There are books that will go into a great deal of depth on the politics and the even the sociopolitics of the time. But if you want to just give yourself a bit of a whistle-stop tour, there is a section on our site called Learn on transformiran.com. And there are multiple articles there that will take you through different eras. So the biblical times in Iran and the biblical heritage that Iran has. We've done the lineage of what happens sort of chronologically as the different dynasties took charge of Iran over history, and then looking at Christianity, pre-Islamic Revolution, post-Islamic Revolution, the time of the Shah, and modern day Christianity in Iran and what it looks like with all the different limitations. So that will it's probably a good hour or so of reading there, but whistle stop for the bits that interest your listeners.
Perfect. So we'll send people there to get the prequel to the conversation. So as Transform Iran begins to get set up, you're kind of seeing some of the persecution that had been maybe foretold is too dramatic of a word. You're beginning to see some of that come into place as your family's traveling through Europe.
Yes, yeah. So it happened gradually,
Yeah.
and really by the time things were really needing desperate intervention from outside, we were established and ready to do something about it. My parents have a real anointing. The seer is strong on them. They've pioneered some critical areas of ministry that at the time everyone was saying, this is way overkill. We don't need this, but they saw the need, things like TV for, satellite TV in Farsi, Christian programming, Christian apologetics in Farsi, a digital church network. A lot of these things, by God's grace, they were able to establish before the real need came together, and we were ready to then respond. So it all kind of grew together. And as people responded to what was happening outside the country, whether it was their own families in the diaspora reaching back to their cousins and relatives in the country, sharing the gospel, seeing churches born, or as we began to evangelize using media, people watching TV programs programs, listening to radio channels and responding to those, we were in a position then to nurture those growing churches in the country. Now there are hundreds of churches across 53 towns and cities that look to us for mentoring, support, resourcing. We bring out leaders to train them. But the whole thing has grown as needs have arisen, and we've been able to meet them by God's grace.